Knights, armored paragons of justice, following a strong ethical code designed to make the world a better place. They fought selfless battles, with the star of chivalry always guiding them to greater heights of evolution, their honorable advancement being their life's work towards which they devoted everything. How could it even be possible that there are people in this world who are not excited and inspired by the fact that such men existed? Apparently, most people today are not excited by such an archetype due to the prevalent standards of today. Today's heroes and points of attraction may be the wealthy guy, the trophy wife, the twitch thought, and I'm not talking about the venerable Egyptian god here, the cheating husband or wife, the person that eats his or her own way to an early oversized grave, and more manifestations of materialism. You see, materialism has seeped deeper than ever, after the powers whose coinage is the material one prevailed, despite the occasional attempts to wrest power from their hands, which happen to fail. Even though this doesn't predetermine the success or failure of any future attempts. This materialism is the poison which has reduced people down to their basic needs and the instincts that govern those. Food, sex, security, the admiration of others for something as base as the human body. Power, such as the power to destroy anyone whom we don't like, because of valid opinions he has, which are advertised as heretical by the press outlets of the same powers whose coinage is the material one. It seems like an age where successful, selfish criminals and vacuous, virtue-signaling celebrities would be esteemed more than their exact opposite, such as selfless men and women who would sacrifice anything to do what is right, not for any reward on any level, but for the sake of just doing what is right and creating a better world. Armor had become a symbol of the knight in the past. This is because the socio-political system had eventually been set up in such a way that those who policed the realm would have some principles far above what the peasantry would have. Those knights happened to own armor, a very expensive piece of equipment at the time, and essential to their work, which was to constantly fight to restore peace in the realm, delivering justice and righting wrongs, such as destroying bandit groups and marauder threats that plagued towns. And in times of war, they would serve their liege in his campaigns. While the peasant cared about his life, his belongings, and his leisure above all else, the knight willingly submitted all those to a higher purpose, not caring for the risk of losing it all. That is clearly another level of conscience, which creates, factually, a different class of person. The word knight derives from the ancient German word Knecht, which means servant. Indeed, the very word for knight reflects its very essence, which is that he is no longer a servant of his own self, but of something higher than himself. Was his lord, however, always virtuous and worth serving? Not always, because nothing in life is perfect. The system of chivalry, however, created a system of values, which determined support or war against certain characters, so that the system regulated itself. But what regulated the system the most was not the appraisal of other characters outside the knight, but a system of cultivating virtues, which ensured that the knight himself has a strong moral compass. It was a culture of striving for excellence. The difference between the common soldier and the knight is that for the knight, the main war he always fights is inside of him. The common soldier is typically led by his instincts and only fights to gain something, be it wealth, fame, women, or anything else. The knightly archetype was created to elevate soldiers from common murderers and thieves to someone who fights for right ideals and only when it is right to do so. Without this archetype, Europe would have remained sunken deep in the Dark Ages, with no hope of emerging out of it and into the Renaissance. To this end, many a sage and warrior has worked to make the knightly archetype burn bright in the conscience of any young, aspiring warrior. A prominent figure was a medieval Spanish scholar, sage, knight, and alchemist called Ramon Llull, who wrote the Book of the Order of Chivalry. In this book, the very first page talks about the archetype of the knight. There once was no charity, loyalty, justice, or truth in the world. Enmity, disloyalty, injustice, and falsehood came into being, and because of this, there was error and confusion amongst the people of God, who were created so that God be loved, known, honored, served, and feared by man. In the beginning, when contempt for justice had come into the world because of the diminution of charity, justice sought to recover its honor by means of fear. And thus the entire populace was divided into groups of 1,000. And one man, more kind, wise, loyal, and strong, and with greater nobility, beauty, and devotion than others, was chosen. This man was called a knight. As we can see, chivalry was always about creating a pyramid which would point upwards in human evolution, showing the way to aspiring warriors. Indeed, and that is the case. The archetype of the knight existed not only outside Europe, but in different ages inside Europe as well. The ancient Spartans, the elite warriors of any European civilization, the Roman legionnaires, the samurai of the Japanese. It is in fact hard to think of a place on Earth where there wasn't an organized attempt at some point to merge fighting man with some virtues. It could just be argued that the medieval knight did it more methodically and towards a better defined set of virtues than any other. Going back to the Dark Ages, it is hard to think of another group of people that might have contributed more towards exiting that state of brutality and suppression of anything spiritual and towards entering an eventual renaissance of the spirit, the arts and civilization in general. It can be seen in any literature regarding knights that a fallen knight was considered worse than the worst human being, for having known the full scale of the importance of his work in trying to upgrade humanity and protect what's good and right, and yet having allowed his darker and lower side to ultimately take control of his moral compass. Llull condemns such a person in the harshest way possible, and says that such a person, if he has anything left of a knight in him, should take his own life, as he would kill an enemy of the order of chivalry. But, Llull continues, as it is morally wrong to commit suicide, a person like that should be killed by another knight. The knightly romances, that branch of literature which narrates knightly deeds of high ideals, also mentions a great deal the idea of a fallen knight, whom true knights would wage war upon. One thing that was both a problem and a solution in regards to who became a knight was that it was commonly a matter of birth in a knightly family. It was a problem because the soul that may have incarnated as a future knight may not have been a suitable one for that task. but one of the lower caliber, which would be very well suited to being a farmer, laborer, merchant, or craftsman. Giving higher tasks to a lower soul inevitably leads to lowering the results to the level of conscience of that soul. This largely explains why there were things like robber barons, brigand lords, brutish mercenary captains, and fallen knights in general, who had often come from a knightly background to which they didn't do justice. But the whole inheritance thing was also at the same time a solution of some kind, because growing up in a knightly family would positively affect your genetical predisposition towards certain attributes, and also your upbringing would be more suitable for being a knight. But ultimately, the soul matters way more in determining who is fit to be a knight than any other attribute. Which opens up a question that we will examine in another video. Could reincarnation actually be real? This new Middle Ages we are entering is quite different than the last one, but also very similar in the core of what constitutes a Middle Ages. It will most likely be a deeper one than the previous, because the forces that actively work towards it now have global reach, with communications and transportation technology being far more potent than ever before. The comparatively smaller positive side of this is that voices like mine, which work in the opposite direction, can also have a global reach. However, communication giants have a stranglehold on internet activity, which they have not fully utilized yet, saving it for the right moment and just flexing its muscles for now to avoid alternatives being created by using this power too much before they need to. The future these forces seek to create is truly dystopian. It is one of fearful and controllable subhumans, similar to the orcs in Tolkien's world, controlled by fear and deformed psychologically into the unlikely vessels of any virtue's essence. Their allegiance to seeking the truth gone, with the only truth for them being the one that their evil masters dictate for them there is. What can a new chivalry do to save mankind from this grim and impending fate? Frankly, it doesn't seem that even in the best case scenario everyone can avoid such a state. But even if some do it, things may change. Remember Lul. 1 in 1,000 may be enough to tip the scale. If we ask the renowned anthropologist Joseph Campbell for the reason for mankind's downfall, his answer would be that it's because we stopped performing ceremonies. You see, rituals are what, for as long as mankind existed, has helped us align ourselves with higher archetypes. It is not that the gods or God needed the rituals. It is that we needed them in order to attune ourselves with something higher that would then vibrate in us through our life and allow us to perform not as driftwood in a sea of instincts, but as a seaworthy vessel, not afraid of the tempests of life, and with meaning and purpose to guide it as a star. A knight always was and always will be defined by virtue. Virtue is the whole of all virtues, which don't really exist as such, and are the breakdown of it into facets that are easier to understand and exercise in daily life. It is the real inner power, the control that one has over forces within him, that in ordinary people tear them apart every moment of every day, creating a chaotic and meaningless life. It doesn't matter if there are birds or airplanes in the sky, horses or automobiles in the roads, and peasants or tractors in the fields. The archetype of the warrior, selflessly trying to guard mankind against evil, is an archetype eternal.